Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Frankie, let me just start off by thanking you for that introduction and thank you for the work that the March of Dimes does. And for me, it's a personal story, and you know it, Frankie. My son Cedric was born 10 and a half weeks early, and he spent 42 days in the NICU while I was leaving every morning, coming back every Thursday night, going to Congress. But one of the things, and I say this because I see so many of our influencers and business people in the room, one of the reasons why I was able to go to work with him in the NICU in a little isolette was because the Drew Brees Foundation donated cameras to overlook every isolette in Oshner Baptist Women's Pavilion. And that small token from the Brees Foundation allowed not just me, but many of the parents to go on working because we could pull up on our phone 24 hours a day and watch our child in the NICU. So to the extent that you have the wherewithal, and it just goes to show that very small things can go a long way sometimes. So Frankie, thank you for the work that you and the March of Dimes does, and thank you, Stephen, and everyone for coming out. I won't be long because I really would like to answer questions and have a back and forth as opposed to just me thinking what you want to hear. I'd rather you all ask questions. It's no secret that we're in a different time and that the leadership of this country is a lot different than the leadership last time. But the truth of the matter is the needs of this country are the exact same. And those needs are making sure that our families have the ability to keep a roof over their head, preferably in a home that they own, food on the table, and clothes on their back and their children's back, and the ability to take care of their parents to make sure that their parents can live out their life with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And to some extent, the independence that they want. And so when we think about where we are, what I'd like to highlight in one of the pieces of legislation I'm working on is that we're going to concentrate on the states that have been typically the bottom 10 states for over the last 20, 30 years. Louisiana is one of those 10. And if you look at Mississippi, they're in there. Alabama is in there. Kentucky, and some others, but they're consistently at the bottom in terms of the Politico, USA Today, and all the rankings because of high unemployment, high poverty, poor health outcomes, and infant mortality. The list goes on, and we're always in that bottom 10. So what we're working on, and we have a commitment from all Democratic leadership, both on the House and the Senate side, that we're going to look at legislation that would commit billions of dollars to those states over 5 years that they cannot spend on anything they're already spending money on, but new programs to foster those areas such as job creation, vocational training, summer job for youth, health care, all of those things. And for a state like Louisiana, and I say this a lot, I just don't think people believe how true it is. For a state like Louisiana where the needs are so great, we don't have the luxury to be bipartisan. We don't have the luxury to retreat to our respective corners because somebody's a Democrat and somebody's a Republican. We have to come together and work because the people in the state need so much. And I'm not talking about just individually, I'm talking about infrastructure-wise also. If you look at the bridge, you know we lose almost $1 billion just in traffic in the Baton Rouge area every year. Well, the state and the city will never have the ability to fix that without great, and actually insurmountable tax increases. But that's where the federal government comes in. So when you hear, especially this administration, talk about an infrastructure plan for the country, and they say it's a $200 billion infrastructure plan over 10 years, that means it's $20 billion a year. The infrastructure needs in Louisiana alone are $20 billion. So when you start looking at the whole country and looking at infrastructure in a comprehensive manner, then let me just list what you're talking about. You're not just talking about roads and bridges. You're talking about levees. You're talking about dredging the Mississippi. You're talking about expansion of broadband so that in rural areas of Louisiana, you could do telemedicine. The kids can have access to the internet. Families can do education online, and we can promote upward mobility. But you also have to talk about our school buildings. You have to talk about our waste and water treatment. And I hate to tell you that Flint, Michigan is not the only place in this country that the lead levels are higher than they should be in the water. So that's one of the things that we're working on. And then as head of the Congressional Black Caucus, 48 members, we've been in existence now for 47 years. We represent 78 million Americans. But by the way, only 17 of that 17 million are African American. We represent very diverse areas, a lot of rural areas, a lot of urban areas, but what we find that the needs are not that unique. And what people are fighting for is really opportunity. So that's where we find ourselves. Now let me just get into a little bit of our Louisiana stuff, and maybe a little bit more partisan than the other stuff I said. But before I go into that, I'll just say that the delegation has a great working relationship. It's no secret my relationship with Steve. We served in the Louisiana legislature together. But I have a great working relationship with Garrett Graves. Garrett and I, actually, Garrett caused me to lose our record. Steve and I never offered an amendment that we lost. Garrett and I, we offered one amendment that we lost, but we've passed about 15. But those amendments are important because they talk about duplication of benefits. They talk about how cities, especially this area, can recover after a flood. So we work together. And as we have to write new flood insurance next year, we'll be continuing to work together. But now, let me just caution all my friends in the room, and I don't know if anybody read the book Stranger in Your Own Land. And it's by a journalist who came to Louisiana and wanted to live in Louisiana for a while because she was writing a book about why people vote against their self-interest. And I won't get into the elections and the conclusions that she drew, but I will tell you that in Louisiana, in this partisan climate, we can't get caught up in the rhetoric or the feel-good nature of what someone is saying. Like, all of this, we're going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. Mexico trades with us to the tune of almost $5 billion a year, just Louisiana. They buy our agriculture, oil and gas. It's $2 billion in exports to Mexico. So when we start talking about Mexico and we alienate this fragile relationship that we have with them, just know that about 800,000 jobs in Louisiana are tied to trade with Mexico. So I just want us to be very clear that as people talk about immigration and all these other things, that Mexico is a very important trading partner for Louisiana. And so for all of our farmers and all of our other people in this state, we have to make sure that we respect that relationship, because guess what? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I don't know how it happened, but it happened. Brazil is a threat to the United States in terms of trade. So Mexico just made their first order of corn through Brazil. If we lose them as a trading partner, just think about what it's going to do to our economy here in Louisiana. So I say all that to say words have consequences, and we need to make sure that we're looking at our bottom lines. But the good news is that I think our delegation, with the clout that we have the ability to keep working towards improving Louisiana. Our clout keeps rising. I always say we're more creative because of the Louisiana culture, but we're also smarter than the rest of them. So we get to have great fun with that. And then the other thing I'll close on is that we just finished criminal justice reform on the House side, doing some prison reform stuff, so it headed over to the Senate. We still, on a federal level, have to do something about what we're doing in our criminal justice system. And I'll just tell you that under Jindal's administration, I was in the House, we went in and we doubled good time. On the federal level, we only give 47 days, and every 7 days that you add in good time, you save yourself almost $50 million a year. That $50 million could be used to do a whole bunch of things all across the country. So we're working on prison reform. What we'd like to do is make sure the recidivism rate is low. We don't want people coming back, but more importantly, we don't want more victims going forward. So with that, let me just answer questions, and that way I can get a feel for what you all want to talk about. And I left 15 minutes to do that. If you don't have any questions, I'll just talk about the congressional baseball game.
If you would, please use the microphone so they can pick that up on the.
I'm curious. So it sounds like we have a good working relationship with the congressman from Louisiana, regardless of race. I mean, not race.
Well,
Regardless.
that too.
But I think I'm wondering if the fact that the flood is a big, huge flooding is a huge issue for us. Is that why you think maybe other states can't have that same kind of, bipartisan?
Well, no, I think other states just have the luxury where their members, well, not the luxury. The unfortunate thing is I think that those states, they're just so entrenched in their partisan politics that they go to their respective corners all the time. In our state, in our Louisiana legislature, it was never like that. Now, it's like that now. In fact, it's worse than Washington right now. But when I was in the legislature, we'd fight during the day, and in the evening, we'd figure out how to go eat and figure out if we could find common ground. The most important thing is, I believe, is that we want the end conclusion. We may differ on how to get there, but we agree on what we want at the end. And that is the most important part. So that's why we come together. But other states, we're in this time where ideology is really hampering progress. Jeb Henslin over Financial Services, who's responsible for passing out flood insurance reform from his committee, does not believe in the program. He believes that the program should be actuarially sound, which means there is no program. It will never be actuarially sound. However, his district flooded. Didn't change his mind. That's the dangerous part of where we are. And by the way, now people understand it's not just Cajuns living on the bayou who keep flooding. It's people all across the country. So, but why they're not as bipartisan, and look, I have a great working relationship with most of our members, let me just say that. But to the extent that people let, go too far to whatever side, it does hamper our ability to come together on even things we can agree on. Did you have? Oh, okay. First one working.
There we go. Is that working?
Yep.
Good. Hey, Congressman, thanks for coming. How do you see the redistricting process playing out for the congressional seats in Louisiana after the 2020 census? And in particular, do you see any changes that should happen or will happen in your district when that time comes?
I can tell you this, the redistricting process will be completely different than it's ever been. I think districts are going to change dramatically. But I can't tell you what that's going to look like because you still have the Wisconsin case and other cases pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. So depending on how they rule, I think that will guide what we do here in Louisiana. We don't have pre-clearance anymore, but we still have the Voting Rights Act in effect that we can't violate. So I think it's going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit more contentious than it's been in the past, but I expect that all districts are going to change, some substantially.
So, Congressman, we certainly have had more experience with hurricanes and responding than almost anywhere else in the country. And we hear this in constant criticism of FEMA response.
Mm-hmm.
And I know as a media person, I was trying to give out information to people about get a small business loan. this is where you can get this. But it seems like some of the national policies are in conflict one with another, because if you took that loan, then you weren't eligible for something else. And there isn't a coordinated approach to this, and what is being done now to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes that have been made in the past?
We fixed some of that, but some of it flies in the face of common sense, especially when you start looking at the temporary housing units that they bring in. The best example is down in past Chalmette in Shell Beach, that I went there, and it was a trailer park. People lived in trailers there. That's their way of life. To replace that trailer probably would have been about $75,000. For them to send them a temporary trailer cost us about $75,000. That makes no sense. We should then give the secretary the ability to waive those types of rules if there's substantial cost savings, because I'm sure if you would have just sent them a travel trailer and kept some of their award money, they would have been happy, the government would have saved money, and it would have been much faster and we would have moved on. So we're really trying to bring common sense to it. Part of it is that we still have not fixed the jurisdiction problem. So the Stafford Act comes under transportation, which Garrett Graves sits on. FEMA comes under Homeland Security, which I sit on. That does not make sense. All of it should come under Homeland Security when you start talking about disaster response and mitigation. Now, we've learned our lessons from incidents of the past. However, FEMA's still not staffed up. I mean, it is still not at probably 80% capacity. And when you start talking about major hurricanes hitting Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Texas, Florida, and all of those places, that's when you need to be, that's when you have to stand up the most. So we still have a long way to go, but Garrett and I are consistently just tweaking and tweaking and tweaking it. Now, in this room, I'll just let you all know, one of the things that I talk to my leadership about is, if we take back the House, we need to make reform of the Stafford Act a priority. We need to do it quick, we need to do it real, and we need to make sure that it makes common sense. So, so that's where we are. A lot of people agree with your sentiment, though.
Who are the potential Democratic nominees for president?
Anyone living and breathing. Let me just say this. I've talked to a number of them. I went to lunch twice with Elizabeth Warren. I had a 2-hour meeting with Biden. I went to dinner with Bernie. I talked to the House members that are running all the time. It's a wide open field. Now, my gut tells me if Biden decides to go, then he is a force that would be hard to beat. But there's so many wild cards out there that you have Terry McAuliffe, the former governor of Virginia, and the list just goes on and on and on. Every senator in the United States believes they can be president. So you start with the 48 Democrats that are in the Senate, so that's 48 candidates. And, you know, so it really could be anybody but me. Because I promise you one thing, I'm not running.
Who would you like to see?
I don't know. Really, I would like to see what they're running on. And one, whether it's realistic. Two, whether it does. My entire psyche right now is on, does it improve the family unit? Does it increase social upward mobility? Does it make cities and neighborhoods safer? All of those things. So I really am waiting to see who can come up with a good agenda that I agree with, and two, have the ability to win.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
You spoke a little bit about infrastructure earlier. Do you know if we're getting any federal dollars here in Baton Rouge or Louisiana in general for infrastructure?
Well, I can tell you one thing, and this is just not being flippant, but under the last administration, we punched well above our weight in what we received in terms of Tiger grants, infrastructure money. But the short answer is yes. To the magnitude we did under last administration, the real answer is no. We got hundreds of millions of dollars from Secretary Fox when he was the Secretary of Transportation. He came down here a number of times, so he gave us hundreds of millions of dollars so that we can invest in the roads and bridges aspect of transportation. But that's not just the end of it. I mean, we know now more than ever that drainage and levees and all of those things are a part of infrastructure too.
What's the chance the DACA issue is ever going to get an up-down vote in the House?
I would say right now, probably about 75%. Right now, there's a fight to do Queen of the Hill process, which means bring up all of the bills, and whichever one gets the most votes will pass. The one that will get the most votes is the Hurd-Aguilar bill, which deals with DACA and provides some money for border security. When you start putting the diversity visa program in there, which President Trump calls the lottery program, and you start talking about chain migration, then you get into a complicated area where then you're talking about comprehensive immigration reform. So as long as we're talking about DACA, I think we can find a fix. And if they get the 2 more signatures, it will force a vote in the House. So I think we're very close to it. But let me just bring up why I think words and people paying attention matters. When the president and others say the lottery visa system, they really make you think they put a whole bunch of names in a hat and pull them out. And that's just not true. There is an extensive vetting process, which years of wait before you even get your name into that system. And by the way, people, 40% of them come from the continent of Africa. That's the only way that people from Africa really get into the United States. But when they come, they're usually speaking at least two languages. They go on to get doctorate degrees. They're better educated when they come than even our own children. So we just have to be careful about the rhetoric, the words we use, because if it touches the diversity lottery system, I won't support it, and I don't think any member of the CBC will. And then when you start talking about chain migration, that's just inflammatory from the beginning. But however, we can't just start judging people about the value we think they're worth. So as much as the president talks about chain migration, how bad it is, we can't ignore the fact that his beautiful, smart, intelligent wife, her family came over to the United States through family unification, which he calls chain migration. That's how her mother and father came over, which is not different from how many of the immigrants get the rest of their family over to the United States. So that's why I think it's important to stay on DACA, on border funding. And look, you want money for a wall? I'll give you some money for a wall. But we have to fix the DACA issue.
Congressman, the 2016 Great Flood affected this area and a lot of parishes in Louisiana. We still have people here in Baton Rouge that are still working to get back in their homes. I think the maximum that the federal government gave was $33,000 to people who didn't have flood insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere around 80 to 90% of people who flooded in the Baton Rouge area didn't have flood insurance. Well, we hear about our neighbors in the Houston area. We hear that they received more than $33,000. If you could clarify some of that, I read some of the things that you and Gary did by including Louisiana in some of the harbor relief or attempts to do that. Could you just kind of clarify some of the response versus our flood and the Houston area flood?
Well, I'll answer that quickly. The cap is the cap. No one goes over the cap. So no one's receiving more money from FEMA than everyone else. The question becomes the block grant money that we send to the governor, then he established a program to try to make people whole who are not whole. And I don't even think Texas is even that far into that yet. So I would not assume that Texas is any way ahead of us. When people say these floods are 10-year recovery, they really are, unfortunately. But in this situation, hopefully we can reduce it down because we still had so much infrastructure intact.
Congressman, thank you. Thank you for all you do and for your work, especially on the front of dealing with some of the post-flood efforts and activities. Keeping on that theme, you know, we've been on, I work for United. We've been on that front line of helping people. We still have hundreds of folks who still, almost 2 years later, have moved back into their homes. And I think right now we're at that critical point where hopelessness is setting in. So a couple of concerns. One is the concern for some form of mental health support assistance. And I'd be curious of what, if anything, is being done at the federal level on that. The second is there a way to create a waiver that would allow nonprofits to do more work in this space while the government figures out how to do this? Because I think you're missing out on one of the vehicles that's available to us to address some of these concerns.
Well, the short answer is yes, we do take mental health into consideration, and we send community service block grant money strictly to deal with mental health. And I think during Katrina it was Louisiana Spirit. Don't hold me to the name, but we do that. Nonprofits, to the extent that they're serving, we work with them. We try to pave the way for them. Do we fund them? No, we don't. Do I see that changing? Probably not in a large enough way that nonprofits are going to supplement what government does. And by the way, even though it's slow, the governor's moving faster than other people. It's just a nightmare bureaucratic process to get the money approved. And the other thing that holds it up is the IG has the ability to come back 5-10 years later to say you misspent money in the midst of a storm. That doesn't make sense. So we're trying to push that down to either a year or completely stop the IG from being able to come back and second guess governors and other people who are making decisions. And we may have time for one more.
I was getting right under the wire. Congressman, appreciate you coming. Basically, it's fairly common knowledge here that all the Republicans in Washington want to see the ACA repealed. All the Democrats are adamantly opposed to that. Do you see any possibility of some sort of bipartisan support developing for some modifications to the ACA that might mitigate the skyrocketing premiums in the individual market?
Well, some of the skyrocketing premiums are by design and by action that was taken since President Trump took office. And the short answer is no, we're not going to repeal it. It makes too much sense. It's giving billions of dollars to states like Louisiana in terms of the savings and the money. But we are willing to work on it. We know it's not a perfect document, but the only choice we ever get is to repeal it or keep it. And to the extent we start having real conversations about fixing it, I think that we can have that. But now you see from repeal to single payer, I think at some point we will find some middle ground in the middle, but it won't be until after these midterms. But there are a number of things that we're willing to do to fix it, but we don't get a chance. We only get up or down, repeal or not repeal, and we're not going to vote to repeal it. With that, let me just thank you all for having me. It was fun. And thank you all for what you do.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.